Good afternoon, friends. Lovely to see you again. Here I'm Miki Pannell. Going to show you C.Atkins tune today. Now, this is Mr. Sandman. Probably there's 200 versions on YouTube. If you want the kind of freakies, 100% accurate note for note thing, go somewhere else. I'm going to show you what is quite an authentic version, but I've simplified a couple of the fingerings just because it was these enormous stretches which I can't be bothered to do. So what I'll do, I'll go through each section and try and play it as slowly as possible. Bear in mind obviously playing these things slow is actually more difficult than playing them fast. Introduction. Now the first thing we need to know about this song is actually in 3 or possibly 4 different keys, and I'll mention those in a minute. A is the tone of the first one. If you want to know what the basic kind of chords to this are, it starts off with famous phrase. Then it basically just goes through a bunch of kind of sevenths. This is the kind of simplified version. Obviously Shay does a few more jazz style chords put in there, and I'll talk about those. So well, that's the first part. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this is actually a complimentary video. If you want the performance that I did, that's on another one, so you can kind of open that up, look at how I did it when I'd actually rehearsed it. And today I'm just going to sort of botch my way through it. So somebody described this introduction as the Gentleman Start Your Engines riff, which was nice. So we're going from the bottom E and then into the bum 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 bum. The chord that Shay does, I think he's fingering some note down here and then doing some kind of enormous stretch, but I've based it around the major 7th chord. I have to do it fast. Start again. Okay, again. We got that? Through the chord, back down the chord, move the position. So you can play that note, or you can play the note there, which is an important one because that's the major 7th tonality, which gives it that sweet flavour. So that's the phrase. Now that you're going to play later up in D when it does the first chord change, and then later the song plays the whole sequence again, but in Do, in C. So you have to keep that riff same position. What's nice about that one is the way that it's got that kind of dissonant chord, which this is the one where Shay does like a stretch from somewhere down here. He does like, I can't even do it. If you've got a long stretch, you can try and play the chord that way, but in most chords there's usually 3 important notes, and that expresses the whole idea with just these. Okay, so I'll repeat that part again. Then we're into the fingerstyle melody. Now, the secret of all fingerstyle, and I'm not particularly good at it, but the absolute secret is to get the thumb and the accompaniment at a much lower volume than the melody and let the melody sing out. If you can do that, then you're really onto something. So the melody begins with Mr. Sandman. So so you're going Mr. Sandman, or on many of the versions the only melody people play is just Sandman. Down one chord. So if you're not used to doing these kind of alternating bass lines, you want to try and get that working first, and then, because Shay's imitating the Merle Travis style, he probably does it with just 2 fingers on this section. My advice is to play fingerstyle if you can with just these 2 fingers, because it works so well. So again, and there's a bass line there to take you into the 3rd chord of the sequence, which is C sharp 7th. And the little melody on top of that chord is great because it's so simple. I mean, it's a really basic chord. Shay often did that, where he played really simple things without any kind of elaboration. So that's always a good lesson. So then the next chord we're going to be going to is the F sharp 7th, which will be followed by either a B 7th, or you're probably better off with the B 9th, which is keep your pinky free there, because that's going to play the note on top. So again, Shay plays this, or some of the guitarists play this interesting chord, which I think is just, it's got a flattened 9th or something, but it's got this little note in there instead of just playing the F like that. There's actually that, yeah, I think it's, oh no, it's an augmented 5th, is that right? It's a sharpened 5th. But anyway, you just got to think of that chord, and instead of having what would be the regular note there, you're playing one above, and this is a feature of this many other tunes. So on this one you could actually play almost any of the notes from the chord and it fits. So you could do the top string, or the B string, and then we're into the B 9th. So I think probably on the Shay version, because he was so accurate with the alternating bass, he was playing this figure. Type of thing. But I mean, you can just play it the Merle Travis way, which was just basically playing the bottom 2 strings and then the next 2 together. There's no hard and fast rules to this. Now to end, we've basically got an E chord with the 6th down, but probably played with those fingers, that fingering. So you got 1, It's covering these two strings. Got the standard E chord there. And the notes that are picked are the top one and the B string, which is fingering the 6th note. Sorry. So let's put that all together again. Then we're going back to the A with a walking bass line. My recommendation, play it with your thumb, because you can use these. You're going to use the other fingers to play the melody on top here. So nights are lonely. So what we got is the chord sequence is just a straight A chord, and then there's the F9, typical bluesy thing, resolving to the E with a little melody played on the top with the little finger. So very, very typical in so many of these old tunes. You got that 5th chord with a little melody on the top. You can mess around with it. There's a load of stuff you can do with this by altering the chord. You can change the chord to, for example, what about this? Before it resolves back there. You can also, instead of doing the 7th chord, you can move that one up a place, augmented, whatever it is, 5th. I'm terrible with the chords, but to get that kind of dissonant sound, which resolves so well back to this. Or you can actually mix two of them. So you'll hear that in so many different tunes, chord sequences like that. Maybe you could put a diminished in there. A ton of ideas, all based around just the 5th, going back to the 1st chord. Obviously you've got a little melody going on top, so it kind of gets confusing if you start changing the chord. Then we're back to the beginning, Mr. Sandman. When we get to here, instead of going to the B9th, we're going to the minor chord, which I think Shay played up here and did the melody around there, but I got into the habit of doing it down here. So you got your alternating bass line going on here over the B minor chord, and then the melody goes up through the top notes of the chord. Now, what is this chord? Well, good question, you might ask. I think it's same as that one, is it? I think that's a minor 6. But what you want to do is you want to keep your finger across all the strings, because you've still got to keep the alternating bass line going on there. And on the top you've got the D minor chord with one added note, which I think is the 6th note, but don't quote me on that. So that part together. Sandman. So there's the little introduction there. Mr. Sandman. This is over a B7th chord. Going to the figure that we saw before, the E9th with the little melody on the top. Now it's one of the parts that you need to practice the most, because that's where the kind of famous melody resolves before the key change. You've got to make sure you get that right. Personally, I never practiced, which is, well, not enough anyway, which is why I'm playing so sloppy for you, but what the hell. So Mr. Sandman, from sand, or whatever the words are. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because you've got two very quick changes of tone. The whole melody is now going to move up 5 notes, 5 semitones, up to D. Quite logical. But then, just when you think Shea is going to play the whole tune in D, he suddenly puts a D7th chord and then changes the tone once again, this time to G. It's absolutely ingenious. Who would have ever thought of doing something as crazy as that? But it really works. So you finish off the key change. Same melody as before. And then it's going to go into this section that goes. Well, when I figured this out, I was looking at the guitar thinking, where the hell is he? What is this? But really what he's done is he's just changed, he's played the 5th of the G and changed the tone to G. And this whole section where you've got the tops of the G chord that you would get if you fingered this type of position, or if you put like a G7th, and you're in this kind of second area, not the G down here, the G here. So the figure is this, and this is important because it repeats again with the picking after. So you got the first part is top 3 strings, 7th fret, to the minor, which is not the top string. The next 3, you've got this minor triad again. This is a beautiful chord. Don't ask me what it is though, but the notes here, you've got the 6th fret of the E string, you've got the 7th fret of the B string, and then the 2 bottom notes are the E. So, and what he does is he plays first the top 3 strings together, then the next set below. Okay, sounds a bit like Hotel California, that part. Then there's another nice chord here, which again is, I think, coming out of the B7th, and we're playing the flattened 9th, or you can think of it as the augmented 5th or something. But again, instead of just playing the standard tone, we've moved that shape up again. So this is, like I said, a variation on the chord that repeats several times throughout the song. And obviously you can put it into loads of your own stuff as well. So that whole section again. So you're fingering quite a few of the notes here, but really you're only playing the top 3. Another altered chord there. The notes of this one are the A flats, and then these 2 notes together, which is the C and the E. Then then something which is actually quite simple, which is just an A6 chord. So that's if you use the standard shape, put your finger down on the F sharp. Not sure exactly which groups he's using there, but it's little triads together, moving up and down to the G, between the A6 and the G6, and then so here we're in the A minor position, and you're adding one extra note there on top, so we're in this position, and there's a C being added. So if I play that whole section again, and then the phrase finishes with a D that's going up to an E flat, and then back to the D with the sixth, top three strings, so just the top of a D chord, going up and putting the sixth. Okay, now the second section is very, very similar to the first, but this time he's using a picking technique, which is basically this. It's so if we start with the top three strings at the B position, well, it's not a B chord, it's a G6 chord, I think, or some variation, because we're still in G, so this is around this position. So it's I think it's a G major 7th. Yeah, it is. That's major 7th. So we're going to play first the second string, not the top one first. The arpeggio goes like this. It goes. Okay, only 3 strings. B string first. I don't know if you can see this. The same little figure on the next 3 strings, starting with the middle of the triad. And the pattern just repeats like that. Hang on, let me get the chords right. Yeah, so the third part is over that. If I move my finger out of the way, you got middle first, bottom, middle, top, and back to the middle. And then the same, but just moved down one inversion. Great little effect that you can use for any type of improvisation around little chord tops. Take the top of chords, and a whole load of Shay stuff is based on that. Where are we? So what's that? Same position as before, over the B 7th chord with the added one going on and off. And the same again that we did before, this chord here. Very slowly. Okay, so that's that part. part is over the A minor chord, and he just basically plays through the notes of the chord. Again. Sorry. And when he goes to the final A, it's the third string bent up a tone with the top one. So that kind of works well if you do it quickly, obviously, and you can mess around and play probably different notes with it. It is slightly staccato as well, so each time you play it with this hand, you immediately take your finger off just slightly to dampen it, and that gives it that type of thing. The next part, I should imagine, causes like a massive amount of controversy, because there's this 4-chord sequence, and I've seen this in various different books transcribed in different ways, and I'm sure on YouTube everyone's arguing about it, but the basic chords that you need to know is you've got a chord. That chord is a fingering of an A9. But the fingering I'm using are the 2 notes from an A chord, and then on top you've got the 7th and the 9th. Great little chord, good for swing. Loads of stuff you can do with that. Yeah, like Brian Setzer, he uses that type of figure a lot, so there's that one, and then it goes to this amazing chord, which is so the notes of this one, I'm playing the whole chord, but on the Shay recordings and on various other recordings that I've heard people do, they don't always play the whole chord, they just pick a couple of notes out of it. But you've got C, then on the 3rd string an E, top string B, and that all together gives you this sound. And again, as I mentioned before, you can just play little parts of it if you want, or just groups of 3, anything. So that whole sequence would go Mr. Sandman, and the final 2 chords are the top of an A, I think it's an 11th or a 13th chord, it's basically this chord. Sliding down to, but Shay I think only picks the top 4 notes of that chord, so again, Shay never probably ever played the same thing twice, but that's the basic idea. So that whole final section is okay. Then the final section is basically the same as the first section, but this time we're going to another key change. So it's actually the 4th key change, which goes to C. Same figure. That type of thing again. Shay doesn't actually alternate the bass line this time, but I've forgotten what he does. He does some other figure on the bass line just to make it a bit varied, but just to keep things simple, we'll just play it as before. One very important thing, if you don't want to learn every single part of this and you just want to learn the basic melody, I would recommend learning it in C. And the reason for that is that it's become something of a gypsy jazz standard Django Reinhardt didn't actually record this, to my knowledge, but if you go to any kind of big gypsy jazz festival or jam session, it's become a standard, and it's quite easy to solo over, especially in C, because in C the chords would be this. You'd have the normal A chord to start, then it goes to B7th to E7th to G7th to D7th and back, resolving to G7th. The gypsy jazz guys tend to do you know, the sort of more gypsy chords, be stuff like, you know, and then obviously you can put a whole load of soloing over this single note stuff. So you start off with a few arpeggios down to B7th, that's up and start. So that makes an interesting kind of variation on the C.Atkins fingerstyle thing, where you can actually do a nice change of tone and do some single note stuff in there. So, you know, nothing sacred. The end has always been a bit of a mystery. I've got the book C.Atkins in 3 Dimensions, which is absolutely the best book for accurate transcriptions, and the very final sequence of this would be where there's Mr. Sandman, bring me some, and there's a kind of figure that does something like this, where there's the F note with this little triad on the top. And I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it goes something along the lines of, you know, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to play the notes of the chord in a different position and not do the slide. If you want to get it exactly like the record, I'd recommend going to the book I just mentioned, the C in 3 Dimensions, and find that out. But this kind of resolves it just as well. So if you play it in that way, you're getting this chord, don't ask me what it's called, very dissonant, even more dissonant, horrible, ugly, and that sets the tension to finally play this, which I think is a 13th chord, or it might be an 11th, because the notes are C, the 4th of the chord, and then the 2 top notes here. It's the same as this chord here, but it's got one extra. This has got one extra note in. And that's it. Any questions, stick them below and I'll see if I can sort them out for you, or any other requests. Happy picking.